The following is a presentation of 13ABC Action News. Now, your table is ready. Join 13ABC's Jeff Smith with the decision makers of Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan. This is the Roundtable.
And hi there, a good Sunday afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Roundtable program for this new month, November. And hey, look at it. We are 2 days away from the general election. I know you've been inundated with political talk this morning on the national shows and also here on 13ABC. But we couldn't think of anything better to talk about than the election. Obviously, been leading up to it. In fact, there were those out there saying 3.5 years ago the candidates started running. It gets earlier and earlier, it seems. But we have put together a great panel of guests today here on the Roundtable to talk about that big vote coming up just 2 days from now. We have Dr. Joanna Sabo. She is from Monroe County Community College. You've been here before. We welcome you back to the Roundtable.
Good morning, Jeff.
Also, Dr. Melissa Miller and Dr. Russell Mills, both from Bowling Green State University, helping us kind of hone in on this conversation. You know, I kind of in tongue-in-cheek said I don't know what we're going to talk about, but I start off with the week that we've had, and there's been a lot of discussion as far as people said going into this week, and I know we talked about it on 13ABC Action News at noon, there would be this curveball. There would be this huge event that would affect the last couple of weeks of the election. Nobody knew it was going to be of the gravity that Hurricane Sandy and Superstorm Sandy brought. But there we have it. And we're seeing some of these areas. We see Halloween video from some of those trick-or-treaters trying to get back to some sense of normalcy. But your watching of this and just the political ramifications of it, I mean, unbelievable.
Well, yes, the greatest concern, of course, is where are these people going to vote, and will they get to vote on time? Will their governors have to postpone the election, and what will that mean in the long run? By law and constitutionally, they have to submit their electoral college vote by December 11th. But we're hoping it won't come to that. I've read that New Jersey has set up some tents and they're trying to get electricity to where they need to get it. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully by Tuesday they'll be able to know whether or not they're going to vote as normal.
And well, obviously a lot of power outages still remain. We talked last week on 13ABC Action News at noon about going old school on this whole thing. And you know, we were worried. It became the butt of jokes, the hanging chads, the paper ballots in Florida back in 2000. But you know, and we're taping on Thursday. We want to mind you, there may have been advances made, suggestions put forth, but we could be looking at, you hope it's not till December we find out who the president is.
I think all of the affected states really want to hold the election. If they have to postpone for some reason, it makes the whole country wait. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to see that. People really, it was very unsettling when it happened in 2000 to not know the outcome. And I think that even Virginia, for instance, election officials there were saying on Monday, before the storm really hit hard, that they were already putting plans in place, and it may end up being provisional ballots, paper ballots. So I think the election will be held. It may be, the outcome may be uncertain for other reasons. Mm-hmm. Because it's so close. We might not know the winner. We could get a case either from Sandy or from the closeness of the race that we're waiting way beyond Tuesday night to find out, but we'll see.
And we don't even know 2 days left if there's going to be anything else to come out as far as the candidates or stories or backers or those who stray from the political ramifications of what could change this race. I wanted to point out, and this is back on Thursday, newest polls that came out. You mentioned the closeness. Nationally speaking, in AP GFK, Romney ahead 2 points, 47-45. Fox News coming out tied at 46% each. Washington Post, ABC News, 49-49. National Journal, Princeton Survey, Obama 50-45%. And then you break it down state to state to state. We were laughing before we came out here, Russell, not at your expense. We were laughing with you that you have bounced around to some of these battleground states in your career. You've been in Virginia, you've been in Pennsylvania. Hey, look, you're in Ohio now. I mean, have you ever seen anything in your educational career and your professional career, anything like this?
No, I think the race is about as close as it can be given the numbers that you just read. And this election is going to come down to probably about 3 or 4 states. You know, the Obama team has called this their firewall: Iowa, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Virginia. to some degree.
Yeah.
Those states are very close at the current moment. Ohio, obviously, as we've seen here, we just saw the final schedules that the campaigns put out, and they're going to be back here both quite a bit over the coming weeks.
Right.
So what you're looking at really is a focusing for each campaign on where they're going to be. Romney's going to be in Florida, Colorado. The Obama team is going to Wisconsin, Iowa, and they'll be here in Ohio, of course.
And not to be lost in all of this, and obviously the auto industry has become a great point of discussion over the last few weeks, last few months for that matter. And sure enough, last week we saw when President Clinton was dispatched to a certain area. Where did he go first? He opened up in Perrysburg Township at Owens Community College, talking about the auto industry, talking about getting out the vote, the ground game that needs to happen. But we see it again and again and again. President Obama holding an event at Lima Senior High School, bouncing around other communities. Mitt Romney having a huge blowout event with Paul Ryan, Rick Perry, Jack Nicklaus, among others down in Westchester, where right now, as we look at it, and I know we've talked about this, Melissa, is the fact that you see Columbus, you see Cincinnati, and you see a different picture being painted in Cleveland and also Toledo.
Absolutely. I mean, really, we like to say Ohio is a battleground state in part because it's kind of a microcosm of the whole country. And then you look within the state.
The funniest thing I heard, and I'm sorry to interrupt, the funniest thing I heard within the last couple of weeks, NBC News comes out on their Today Show program, and the reporter Chuck Todd, who's been their political analyst, comes out and he goes, "I'll excuse you sitting at home if you are mistaken that these two men are running for the president of Ohio."
Honestly, it sometimes has felt like a gubernatorial race.
Yeah.
But within the state, it's really interesting to me how they're tailoring their message depending on where they are. So we in Northwest Ohio,
How so?
Southeast Michigan, we're hearing all about the auto bailout, and they are talking about that across the state as well, but we really get that message when they're up here. When they're in Southeast Ohio, it's all about coal. It's about coal, it's about agriculture. When they're in the Dayton area, it's about the military, the size of the military, the defense budget, because of course that's a hub with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base there. So they are tailoring, and I think
Which is interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, which is interesting too. Lima with a tank plant down there, and President Obama decides to go there where Mitt Romney's been hitting military.
Right, because it was in one of the debates where this came up, and one of the clips, it was sort of a zinger where Obama looks at Romney and says something like, "You may not realize this, but we're not in the 19th century anymore."
Right.
I can't remember the exact
Bayonets and horses.
Right, we don't need bayonets and horses. That's right, and it was sort of a zinger, and he now though may need to, that may explain the Lima trip. I mean, he definitely doesn't want to alienate potential voters who are in that defense industry, in the military. So yeah, but
it doesn't take being in a very specific area either to see why this is a swing state from the auto agricultural split. I've sat in a couple of diners like around MacArthur, Ohio, and if you just listen to folks' discussions at the table, you hear one person saying, well, I have to take care of my farm, I need to take care of this. You hear another one saying that they want to see more military strength, and they even talk about what countries they want to see attacked. Yeah. And then in the same conversation, you hear a defense for the auto industry. And these are folks sitting around the table at a diner in this state.
As we get to Tuesday, and we talked about this week with the impact of Sandy, the superstorm, as we get to Tuesday, do people take that to the voting booth with them, how they thought the president, especially the undecideds, because, and we talked about it, we said Sandy wasn't going to affect those who had already made up their minds or are obviously already voted. Right. So do people take to the voting booth with them Tuesday how Mitt Romney responded and how the president responded? More about how the president responded.
I think they pay attention, but I think that people are affected by their own microcosm lives, like Melissa was saying. I think they're listening to the messages, but they're also thinking for themselves about themselves and where this is going to take them and their families in the future. And that's the sort of independent thinking that makes us Americans. I'm going to think about my world and how it's affected here. But on the other hand, if they get a very strong message from relatives, from the news, from the media, it does cause them to pause and think. Now, there are plenty of undecided voters who, even in these polls we were talking about before, because what I find amazing about these polls is that both conservative and liberal bases are reporting similar numbers, and you don't always see that.
So let me get you in on this, Russell. I guess we treat this election stubbornly? Do we go thinking about ourselves? Because Economy was talked about for over 2.5 years. That's what was going to determine the election.
Well, I think, interestingly, on the Sandy point, I think the pictures of Governor Christie with President Obama are going to be a powerful thing.
How so?
I think that 80% of Americans in the ABC Washington Post poll said that they supported the way the president handled this, the response. And even of the people who said they're going to vote for Romney, 66% of those people agreed that he had handled this well. So one of the famous lines is, good governance is good politics. And I think that this event will really, in some degree, maybe get some of the people who weren't enthusiastic about voting for the president back on
I agree
to
with
vote.
that in part because of that idea, again, that they're stopping and thinking, what if this happens to me?
Yes.
What if a storm hits me? Can I count on whoever's our president to make sure that our area will be taken care of?
Well, let's look back in recent history, though. I mean, was there so much that could not be done badly because of the response and the reaction to Katrina?
Well, I mean,
does that make sense?
I mean, I think an interesting talking point that came out of this week was that former FEMA Administrator Michael Brown came out and criticized the president for his handling of the event in one of those sort of ha-ha moments. But I think we learned a lot from Katrina and the response to that. And I think that those lessons have been taken now. When you have a FEMA director who used to be an emergency management professional, so I think those differences matter.
Yeah, and I was going to say they'll matter moving forward through the Obama presidency and any future Democratic or Republican presidency. That's how powerful Katrina was, and the federal government response was deemed to be so ineffective. I mean, I think it'll be decades, before we see such an inept response. But I want to chime in here because I think it's right that the people who are going to be influenced and maybe influenced by how the president and Mitt Romney responded to Katrina are those undecided voters in the middle and those who were likely to vote for Obama, but maybe might have stayed home. They might now come out. And lastly, think about the undecided voters for a minute. The president does not want the last impression they have of him to be bungling the response to Sandy. So I'm sure the Obama team is very happy to have seen those ABC News, Washington Post poll numbers.
And I thought what was going to come out of your mouth was bungling the response to Libya, because that was what was on everybody's mind, and that was what, all of these things as voters, we are force-fed. And the media is to blame. I will put that out there because we are told what I talk to my students about. You guys probably do the same thing. You talk to your students about this all the time. You say the media, its role is kind of a PR directive to tell people what they're supposed to think.
It sets an agenda.
Exactly. So is that what we have been seeing? God forbid we want Sandy to happen. Obviously, we don't want that to happen, but it did change the conversation.
And events are one of those things that both socialize us and direct us. And there could be, like you said, something that happens before Tuesday. We never know when something militarily is going to happen, whether something's going to happen from a security standpoint or something's going to happen again with the weather. It's just things that you can't predict. And that's one of the things that makes politics interesting.
Let me say one thing about Benghazi, though, because it's true that Sandy's kind of knocked Benghazi out of the discussion right now. And that's unfortunate for the Romney campaign because I think they were finally getting their heads wrapped around to campaign on that issue.
And then do they look opportunist if they try to bring it up again?
Yes.
But I will say this, regardless of whether Sandy had occurred or not, I don't think what happened in Benghazi was necessarily going to be decisive in terms of predicting the vote because foreign policy is just way down in the pecking order in terms of what voters care about this time. So I'm not sure that it makes that much of a difference in terms of the outcome.
The last unemployment numbers came out Thursday talking about only 9,000 jobs had been added as far as the unemployment rolls are concerned, or 9,000 additional unemployment figures coming on. So it's kind of that was the last one before the election to come out. And when you look at the unemployment, what is your gauge as far as the job situation? I mean, there has been comment after comment after comment about unemployment numbers aren't where they are because people who have stopped looking for work are not included in these numbers. And then you have the Obama administration saying actually employment is getting better. You see the numbers across the country, 7%, so on and so forth. So how does that weigh in as we get these last couple of days?
I think an interesting facet of the unemployment numbers that really people haven't looked at that much is the fact that private sector job growth has grown tremendously. But at the same time, government jobs are dwindling because governments are cutting back, particularly local municipalities, state level government jobs are being cut back. And that really has had a tempering effect on the unemployment rate probably being lower. Now, the point that you mentioned about people stop looking for work, that's also a component of it. And you may see the unemployment rate tick back up.
And to that effect as well, I mean, the admission from the president that public works programs are what may deem getting this economy back on track. So the public sector may lose some jobs, but you're looking at the growth, obviously, of government positions as well. You guys are going to say?
Well, I was going to say the same thing about that. Just this morning, it was reported that most of the job growth is in large companies. But the reason we see the public sector pulling back is they have the effects of the loss of taxes, and it takes a while for that to hit those public jobs and for those people to get laid off. But we are going to see some growth in that once people come back to work. The housing industry has already started to make a comeback. Those taxes are going to grow. Many of those people will be brought back, and there'll be an expansion of government services.
The argument has continued this week as far as who is responsible for the growth of Ohio. We have talked about it at noon. Was John Kasich's policies the reason why? Was the government?
That is what makes it so interesting in Ohio, because in fact several months ago Governor Kasich was out going around the state, spring, summer, saying the Ohio economy is back, we're doing so much better. And as I understand it, the Romney campaign wasn't real thrilled that the Republican governor was saying that the Ohio economy is doing so well, because Romney's argument, of course, is that the entire economy is not doing so well. So that's really been interesting. But let me tell you, I think something that's been interesting in this last week, looking at the poll numbers across the battleground states where the unemployment rate is below the national average, Obama's doing a little bit better. And so in Ohio, we've had our unemployment rate below the national average, and Obama's been able to hang on to that lead. You go down to Florida, where the unemployment rate's above the national average, and it's been much tighter with Romney taking the lead.
Let's go through some of these numbers. You talk about the battleground states. Iowa, University of Iowa poll, Romney up 45-44. In Wisconsin, NBC, Wall Street Journal, Obama up 49-46. But these are tight races, and there have been big spreads. University of Cincinnati has Obama up 48-46%. Virginia, which you guys keep mentioning, Roanoke College has Romney up Governor Romney, 49% to 44%. And the Detroit Free Press, I wanted to bring this up because again and again, Michigan, where you are located, Michigan, for the longest time, no chance. No chance this is even a competition. Detroit Free Press, WXYZ, Epic MRA, President Obama, 48 to 42. Margin of error typically 3 to 3.5% in these polls. What's your read around Monroe County?
Well, those numbers that you just reported are coming from conservative media outlets. So that doesn't surprise me that they've shrunk the margin a bit. But in Monroe County, you know, we're a swing county as well. We've gone back and forth between who our state reps are, and although we have a pretty solid congressional representative there in John Dingell. But I would say that, like, students keep asking me, they're even confused. I have entry-level students, some of them voting for the first time, and they say, how do we know what's going to happen? What are these candidates going to do? They want to say, and we were all talking about how we hate to predict, but I tell them, both candidates are going to spend still, because they talk about what their parents say about government spending. I said, both candidates are going to spend. You can do your research to find out what are they going to spend it on, and maybe make your decision.
We have to go to a break. I'm shocked you called NBC a conservative news outlet. We will be right back right after this. Stay with us.
Yeah.